Hey everybody, Economic Ninja here. I hope you're doing great. Got a buddy of mine, Mario Stefano, on with me from Galantis Gold. The reason why I brought him on is because we're going to talk about how much crazier it's gotten in the world, especially the United States, the loss of the petrodollar, what's going on with the gold price, and all this banking talk, the banking collapse. The regional banks are going down. Mario, how are you doing?
Thanks. Thanks for having me on, Economic Ninja. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Interesting
You're not
times we're
used to
in, as you
calling me
just
ninja
highlighted.
on. He calls me by my name, but then he calls me ninja on. I like the stuttering.
Hey, hey, look, in this time, I think the Economic Ninja is even more important than just calling you Travis, because we are in interesting times, and you got to be an Economic Ninja to work your way through this scenario, I think.
Yeah, it's so true. In a day and age where you've got to be, got to have all these certificates from big colleges saying that you have the right to go because of who you work with, essentially, to go and give people financial advice. But these guys just have no concept of what's happening. They're the ones saying, "Hey, go buy the bank stocks. This is great," and then 2 weeks later, they're imploding.
Yep.
Before the interview, we were talking, and I want to get to some news stories and some headlines that have to do with gold, and we're going to talk about your company too. And guys, just for full disclosure, I've owned Galantis Gold for quite some time. I was part of a private placement. I want to say back in September. It is free trading. It is one of my long-term holds. This isn't an advertisement for that. However, this is sponsored content because Mario is nice enough literally to call me up and say, "Hey, if you want, I'd love to sponsor you. I know that you invest in the company." And I thank
Yeah.
you for that, Mario. But I want to talk about gold. I want to talk about all that stuff, and then we're going to highlight some stuff of what's going on with the company at the end. You were talking about the loss of the petrodollar. You want to talk about that, or all the crazy things you're seeing right now?
Well, look, I think there's a storm brewing not only in the US but in the Western world, and that's why, as I said, I called you Economic Ninja, because I think you're going to have to fight off all these things in order to make sure that the US succeeds going forward. But when you look at the US and the petrodollar, I mean, the petrodollar was really put in place because the US was to provide security in the Middle East in return for oil. But you're starting to see a lot of cracks forming in that relationship. You now have China brokering a deal with Iran and Saudi Arabia. You
Yeah.
have Saudi Arabia wanting to join the BRICS. You're starting to see cracks in that relationship. You're seeing Russia play an important role now in OPEC plus.
Yes.
And people are moving away from settling the U.S. Selling oil in U.S. dollars. Also, you got China and Russia have formally moved away from that. I think you're going to continue to see other countries starting to move away from that. And when you look at the US, the petrodollar and being that reserve currency is really what provides long term growth to the US, because they've been able to borrow all over the world to fund the consumption of US businesses and consumers. So when you look here at home, I'm right now in San Diego. You probably can't see it behind me, but I'm right in downtown San Diego, and I'm starting to see the cracks. And I've mentioned this to a lot of my friends, and I'll try and tie this all in with what I'm seeing on the ground, I guess. Downtown San Diego, homeless has always been an issue here in California. Don't get me wrong, but I got to tell you, every day it's getting worse and worse. People that are making $150,000 a year are struggling
Yeah.
to pay rent. They don't even own a house. I mean, they're not talking about struggling to pay their mortgage, which is going to be difficult in itself, but they're struggling to pay rent. And I scratch my head sometimes. How the hell are you renting when you're making 150,000 plus, right? But
Yeah.
that's the world we're in. So there's lots of businesses in downtown San Diego, the Gas Lamp, which is the heart of the city in the convention center area, that are they're shut down. So lots of restaurants, lots of empty space, and that goes to the heart of the commercial real estate issue that we're starting to see
Oh yeah.
all over the U.S. And it's not just office towers in New York; it's all over the U.S. And that's really where the regional bank issue starts to play a role, because regional banks are the biggest lender to commercial real estate, whether it's industrial or office towers and all the various local communities. And SVB Bank collapsing, you know, it's a slightly different bank than the traditional banks,
Yeah.
but it shows the stresses in the bank sector in general, where rates have been going up. SVB was different; they didn't have traditional deposits, and obviously extraordinarily badly managed. But you're seeing stresses all over the regional bank, and once that fear starts to hit, you've seen now a mini bank run. It looks like things have slowed down, but just could be another trigger. This it's not the first one, and
Yeah.
this other trigger is going to cause deeper bank runs, I think.
No, I totally agree. Now, I'm glad you bring up that SVB wasn't a traditional bank because a lot of people think of a bank run or a bank collapse and go, well, that wasn't a normal bank, so it's okay. The Fed's going to take care of it. Neither was Bear Stearns. Bear Stearns was not a traditional bank. And when it closed down
Agreed.
in the spring of 2008,
Yep.
people are like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. The Fed moved in, they did
Yep.
something. Then it was Lehman Brothers, which again
Yes.
wasn't a traditional bank, but it caused a great recession. Now we actually see
Yeah.
traditional banks being affected because of
Yep.
SVB.
Yep.
What's
Exactly. And so SVP wasn't a traditional bank because their focus was high net worth individuals in Silicon
Yep,
Valley.
yep,
Um, but there was potential contagion, right, around the bank runs.
yep,
I think the bigger risk when it comes to banks, and there's going to be stresses on the regional banks. You're already seeing REITs
yeah,
and commercial mortgages hitting lows
yes.
because there's no one going to the office. You go to Toronto. I know this is Canada right now in the U.S., but you go to Toronto, you go to New York, you go to the big cities, and I drive across the U.S. Don't laugh at me, but I got a big ass dog that's a wolf that I can't fly with her. So I do drive from Toronto. What we do for our dogs, I drive from Toronto
Dude,
all across the U.S. So I'm speaking from experience. I've done this now a number of times with my dog
it's like
and the
Clifford the Big
family.
Red Dog sticking out of your Tesla window.
Yeah, yeah. I got a big ass dog, and she's amazing. She looks like a wolf, but we've been all over the U.S. and you're seeing stresses
Yeah,
all over the U.S. when it comes to commercial real estate. So that's going to be a big issue for the commercial banks, and it's going to be a big issue when it comes to growth in the long term. I think that's why you're starting to see people saying the Fed may not need to raise further because the banks are tightening for them now going forward. But when it comes to bank failures, I think it's going to be obviously we've seen Credit Suisse now. UBS has now picked up Credit Suisse with some pretty good guarantees by the Swiss Fed. But
Wait.
now
What is
you've
that?
got Deutsche
What do
Bank.
those guarantees tell you, Mario? What is your first initial reaction when they bought Credit Suisse, but then they had that essentially a credit line attached to it
Yeah,
that the Swiss
yeah,
National Bank was? What do you think about?
it's bankrupt. Anytime you have a
Exactly.
guarantee outside of the normal business, and you have government-backed guarantees. Same
Yep.
thing with SVP. First
Yep.
Citizens got a number of guarantees from taxpayers. I mean, these banks are bankrupt, right? So
Uh,
anytime the Fed has to step in and no different than 2008, all the various guarantees that were given to save the various banks, um, that means they're bankrupt, right? All the
yep.
auto companies, when they were provided loans by the federal government, they were all bankrupt, right?
Yes.
So UBS needed those guarantees to make Credit Suisse at least viable under the new restructuring. But now you have Deutsche Bank. But to me, it's these derivatives that I don't think we fully understand, Travis, around gold and silver and commodities and there's I don't know, it could be 100 times paper money
Oh,
off of gold that we don't
we
fully
do understand it,
understand.
Mario. I know you get it and you're trying to downplay it, but no, let's call it out. That is
Yeah.
a tool used by financial institutions
Yes.
to make fiat currencies, look more valuable because they can push it down because there's
Yeah.
so much leverage.
Exactly. And it's all over. It's not just one, it's not just JP Morgan, it's Deutsche, it's Credit Suisse. There is so much paper money leveraged off of physical gold that if there ever is a short squeeze on physical, for example, where people start wanting to put gold under their mattress for whatever reason, um, I really do see gold and then silver for that matter. And look, I don't have any silver assets, but I think both scenarios I do see um, significant price appreciation in both of those. And that goes back to the petrodollar that we talked about earlier,
Yep.
because Russia and the US, Russia and China have been growing their gold reserves along with Turkey, along with India. A lot of the central banks outside of the Western world have been growing their gold reserves. The US has got gold reserves, we believe, but we don't really know even, has the US provided some derivative paper off of, whatever is held in Fort Knox and held in their central bank? I got no idea, right? There is so
Yeah.
much paper money flowing around the physical side of things that, look at China. And I won't say the company, but I have talked to a Chinese company and, they were telling me they're very bullish on metals. No surprise. That's why you got the Silk Road going all over the world and they're securing assets, whether it's copper, like I'm involved, chairman of Doré Copper in Quebec, or gold, Galantis, or lithium, or any of the metals. But what they won't touch, which was a little bit surprising, they will not invest in any asset in the Western world, which I found quite surprising.
I already
had
know
no
why,
idea they
but
were doing that.
what's your thought? Why do
Well,
they
I
want that?
mean, they've been just every time they try and buy something, they're turned down by the various governments. So, for example, there was a TMAC Resources, a really high grade, sizable deposit up in Nunavut in Canada, which I went and visited with the company. I won't mention the company, but looking to potentially buy that out. And a Chinese company bid on it, and they were turned down by the Canadian. Nico eventually bought it, but at the end of the day, there's no government wanting the Chinese to own assets and
Do you know when
metals.
that was? When were they turned down on that one?
So this would have been 2019.
Okay,
Because I
because
was at
I don't know if
Cordoba
you remember,
Minerals at the time, and I
the
was no longer
Canadian
with
government
Cordoba.
came out last year and said the Chinese are to divest out of lithium in Canada. They wanted them out.
Yeah,
So that's one
exactly.
good reason. And then the US wants to go to war with China. So I mean,
Yeah.
they're ramping up the war drums. That would make
Well,
sense. Now, let me do this. I got two headlines. I got to spring on you right now, and I want to get your thoughts. First one: Turkey maintains status as world's biggest gold buyer in January. What do you think about that?
look, same thing. You're seeing significant inflation in interest rates in Turkey, but they're recognizing. I mean, they're close. Obviously, they got relationships with Russia, China, the Middle East. They're recognizing the importance of securing gold to back their currency. And I still see Turkey, and look, there's lots of incoming. Turkey is looking all over for assets, and they want control. And it's just telling me they want to reserve and they want to lock up reserves. They don't have to mine it today per se, but they would love to. But it looks like they're looking for opportunities to lock up gold, just like the Chinese have done. And I think China has done a great. Give them credit. They got 100-year plan. I'm not sure how long their time frame is as they look out, but they've been extraordinarily strategic in locking up high grade copper assets in Latin America, in Africa, gold assets. They're trying to lock up what they view as significant assets, and they've lost in the olden days. 10 years ago, they lost a lot of money investing in early stage exploration. They learned that we want more of a balance. We want things that we see are more advanced, and they're willing to pay significant premiums for things they see as advanced exploration. And the Western world is in some ways being locked out of these potential critical metals. And we got to start looking at home again. And hopefully we're starting to see that, but I think we're still far behind. Canada's great. Australia is great. Don't get me wrong in terms of getting assets. But you go to Europe, they're trying to get assets approved in Europe is still difficult. Trying to get assets approved in the US is like pulling your hair out unless you're in Nevada or Arizona. The rest of the US is extraordinarily difficult, but the US needs to secure metals. It's critical, but China has leapfrogged us in terms of securing the metals what they need for their future.
Yep. So now a couple things. Turkey applied to join the BRICS last June or July, I believe. Another headline that just grabbed me is very interesting here, especially as we're talking about these the banking crisis over in Europe. Turkey's gold imports from Switzerland hit the highest level on record in January. Now, interesting that we have this, like you said, China doesn't want to invest in the Western world because they're seeing the writing on the wall. Turkey's trying to join China's new banking system. They're trying to grab as much gold. And this reminds me of France trying to repatriate their gold from the government, of the US government back in the 70s. So let's talk about that. What do you think about it?
Maybe there's a. I'm starting to become a little bit of a conspiracy theorist because I think there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than most of us really fully understand. But maybe I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of short squeeze plan going on here because you've got Russia, trying to settle in gold, so they're going to need physical gold. You got India, you got Turkey now. Maybe they are trying to get the gold out of the Western world's hands, so that paper money that we've talked about earlier on, if there's no physical gold and you get this true short squeeze, and there's a lot less production, and the production is now being controlled by the Chinese and Latin America, then really the gold that the rest of the world has is what they're producing locally in Canada, Australia, and other places. And that's going to be much more limited in terms of the potential demand for gold. So maybe there's a bigger conspiracy here going, trying to figure out a way to collapse, the Western world economies by squeezing gold, for all we know.
And one
It's
of the best
intriguing.
ways to
It's very
squeeze gold.
intriguing.
Yeah, and one of the best ways to squeeze gold is to watch the interest rate drop, or at least right now stop. We've gotten news
Yeah,
lately when they're even considering a halting of the rising of the Fed mortgage, the Fed interest rate that
yeah,
causes gold to strengthen. So we're looking at news headlines. Just throwing this out there: gold price forecast uh, oscillates in a range as banking fears ease, but at the same time the fears are easing, the US dollar weakens. Do you see
yeah,
any more upside to the US dollar? Because to me, the only way the US dollar could get upside is two ways. Governments go and buy the dollar, which we're not seeing because so many governments are now
yeah,
leaving and joining the BRICS. So they're going to be looking at
yeah.
their own currency. The other way is if interest rates drop, and then that would give strength to the gold price because that means there's going to eventually be more dollars created. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I'm struggling to see continued upside in the US dollar. I mean, there could be short-term blips if there's a, crisis and people just want the security and the ease of holding US dollars. So you can get those kind of scenarios. But I'm starting to think the trend for the US dollar is down. And I'm going back to the serious fundamental issues here in the US where the the 30 trillion, 31 trillion, it could be 32 trillion by the end of the year. I have no idea now how quickly it's growing, but the $32 trillion debt that the US is holding, the 2 trillion annual deficit. So it's going to grow basically another 10 trillion over the next 10 years. There is no surplus.
Yeah.
And the US is not borrowing from themselves, they're borrowing from now the Fed. So they're creating, monopoly money out of thin air because there's less and less buyers now for the U.S. And as China, Russia, India, Turkey now, as you just mentioned, which is not near, as they start to move further away from the U.S. dollar and start backing commodities like gold, there's going to be less demand for U.S. dollars. So, unless the U.S. is figuring out how to cut entitlements, which no one wants to see Medicare and Social Security get cut, but the 750 billion in the military, all raise tax. Can you imagine the upheaval in the U.S. if the Fed says they got to raise, the U.S. government says they have to raise 10% taxes across the board, or put in a 13 or 15% consumption tax in the U.S. I mean, these are serious structural changes that need to occur in the U.S. in order to get this back to a surplus. And remember, the only surplus the U.S. has ever seen, I think, were like the 2 years under Clinton. Travis, like the U.S. has not run any surpluses
You
in a
had to bring
very,
that dude up.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know, but
That was some funny
unfortunately,
bookkeeping that happened
yeah,
just, you know.
but
So
Canada, as a much smaller scale, went through some huge political upheaval when our conservative government tried to restructure. We had Mulroney put in we did the free trade agreement. We put in the GST, which is a commodity or consumption tax. And then the next Liberal government under Trudeau continued, and we built some surpluses and got our economy restructured. But
yeah,
the political fallout on all of that was tremendous.
I bet.
But the Prime
Yeah.
Minister in Canada has significantly more power than the President of the United States. I'm not talking about
Yeah.
globally. I'm talking about how to drive, and same thing in the UK. You just
Yeah.
have more power to drive decisions. In the US, Biden or Trump or Clinton or Bush, they could do what they want, but unless you got the support of the Senate and Congress, good
Yeah.
luck. So there's no will to do these structural changes right now.
Yeah. Let me throw this out there because one thing Canada understands is its natural resources and the importance of supporting that sector because there's a lot of money involved there.
Yep.
Um, let me flip here to talk about your company. And again, guys, in full disclosure, this isn't like any kind of solicitation for you to buy or sell this security or any others. Okay, I'd rather share with you my thought process of why I invested in one of Mario's companies, Galantis. You've already seen it. He thinks with a solid head, and he's looking at geopolitical threats and those threats that could turn into opportunities. to better the company, right? Now, in the amount of time that I've invested in Galantis, the price really hasn't done much. And that is something that's quite shocking to me because the price of gold has done so well lately. Mario, what I wanted to get your take on was because I don't know what you can share or not, but I know we talked about once a fund reaching out to you and trying to buy a controlling stake in the company. And
Yeah.
you were like, negative. I'm not. We talked about it, and you're like, I'm not going to do that because I already know how much this is worth in the future. And that's why this fund is trying to reach out to me. Can we talk about that? Because I like where your head's at, is because there's a lot of people in the space, CEOs, that just want to sell shares and they don't want to go out and develop anything. You've actually went from an exploration company to a producing company. Can we talk about all that? Just chat about it.
Yep, yep. So look, Galantis has been around since 2011, and it operated as an open pit. And over the years, and this is very well, there are a number of companies that try to take control of Galantis. And the reason for that is, 20 kilometers away from us is a world-class deposit that's controlled by a private equity fund called Orion. And Orion picked up this 6 million ounce, 13-gram deposit by the company called Iridium in 2018 for $550 million. And I've heard now that thing could be up to 10 million ounces. So 20 kilometers away, world-class asset. We're on the exact same structure at Galantis. I'm of the view, and I've said this many times in presentations, that this is a multi-million ounce. There's zero doubt in my mind. We've got a multi-million ounce deposit here, and it doesn't take, you look at the drill holes, how shallow our drill holes are, the number of veins that have been identified. I think it's pretty obvious we're a multi-million ounce deposit. So there's been lots of people trying to figure out how to take control of Galantis. What's interesting, though, is you're seeing now sovereign funds trying to get control of assets in gold space. That's what's intriguing. And we've had a number of people, and you look into it, backing through sovereign funds, looking to figure out ways to get control of assets. That's what's now becoming intriguing to me. And when I reached out to you is, today is, it's clear to me now that sovereign funds, and you mentioned some names, are looking to secure gold. And they're looking to back their fiat currencies, or maybe they're looking, in this new BRICS kind of concept, because you're having a new economic bloc starting to form here. They're looking for their currencies to be backed by physical commodities, whether it's oil, whether it's gold. I think gold's going to play an extraordinarily big part of it. That's why China, Russia, as you mentioned, Turkey, they're all trying to get access to gold. They're all trying to figure out a way to get access to gold. And they're going to try and figure it out any way they can. And then when you look into Canada, as you said, the reason I've been exposed to this market for quite some time, I am a chartered accountant, or CPA, I guess now we're all called, by trade. So I started off in the mining industry as in Noranda, which was Canada's largest mining company. Noranda was in oil and gas, forestry, and then they just started focusing on mining, which is now Glencore. So through a few acquisitions, ended up becoming Glencore. But then I became CFO of Lakeshore Gold, and I started at Lakeshore in 2008. And we were right in the midst of the financial crisis, right? Yeah. And it was extraordinarily difficult to raise money at that point in time. But it was easier than today, which is perplexing to me, right? I guess today you don't have Bitcoin and some of the other cryptocurrencies. Again, there's only so much money going around, but I think a lot of focus is going to come back into gold, and it's going to come back in a great way. But Lakeshore, at the lowest point, we were at a $30 million market cap, and it got taken out by Pan American Silver for it was Tahoe, but which is now Pan American Silver, for 1.6 billion, right? And even at the time, Lakeshore only had 2 million ounces, not even 2 million ounces at sources, but potential for a couple of million ounces, and million ounces. I mean, that sort of shows you when the focus turns back to commodities and gold, it's not going to be 5-10 times style returns. You could see some companies getting 20, 30, 40 times returns. Like even the one I'm a chairman of, Doré Copper on the TSX, same kind of concept. It was a former producing mine. It would produce it was a copper gold mine, but if you think in gold equivalent ounces, it would have produced say 150,000 ounces before it got shut down during the financial crisis.
Yeah.
These sort of assets, the focus on these kind of assets, all commodities in the Western world, particularly Canada and Australia and Europe, where friendly jurisdictions, the money is going to flow and it's going to flow really hard. Particularly if you have these competing blocks,
Yep.
no fear of nationalization. If things get really ugly out there, I'm not so sure you want to own assets in some parts of Latin America or some parts of of Africa because there could be risk of nationalizations, right?
Yeah.
And when things get bad, countries got to survive, and they're going to figure out ways to lock up what they view as the most valuable assets, and there will be nationalizations occurring. I'm pretty sure of it. You saw it happen in Venezuela. It happens when things get tough. At least in the Western world, you got exposure to all these commodities, and you're extraordinarily unlikely to see any level of nationalization in Canada, the U.S., or Europe.
Yep. I love where your head's at with the geopolitical issues and especially the economic issues that are assigned to those problems around the world, right? Whether it be Russia-Ukraine situation, supply chain, possible war with China between the U.S. Just because that's not my words, it's just high-ranking officials in our military. When we chatted a while back, I put my consultant hat on because I used to consult a lot for corporations, and when we were talking about the funds that were contacting you, it was interesting because we came up with this idea that just say this, if anyone out there is running a sovereign fund right now, give Mario a call because we have an idea that'll bring a lot of value. Because like Mario's bringing up, there's so many things that are not, you don't understand what's happening, but there's a few people that get it. And there's these ideas that formulate and ways of bringing massive value before this rush into metals. But like we saw from those earlier headlines, the Russian metals are already happening right now. The price is moving. My broker is literally calling me going, they cannot keep the gold in fast enough, the physical. At a certain point, it's going to be drained, and they're going to be looking for actual metal in the ground, like you said, those countries. Let me flip again. You just raised some money for the private placement. You said it is hard to get money. However, you did close a private placement just recently. Do you want to talk about that and what you're planning on
Yep.
doing with it? Oh, and
Yeah.
talk about who got back in. That's what I want to talk about.
Yeah. So we just raised another 2.9 million in our private placement. And when you look at the shareholder base for Galantis, I think we got the who's who of shareholders. We've got
Yep.
Eric Sprott, which I know everybody knows. We have Mike Gentile, who is another up and coming Eric Sprott, who's done a great job in the junior space and has made some great choices on his investments. But in addition to this private placement, we got Ross Beatty coming back into this placement.
Yeah.
And Ross Beatty used to be a significant shareholder in Galantis, and he didn't participate in a lot of our other finance because he wasn't sure about the strategy of the company. And when he initially made his investment in Galantis before I got involved, it was to really explore, because just like I mentioned a little bit earlier on, I see Galantis being a multi-million ounce deposit. There is, again, zero doubt in my mind that we have a multi-million ounce deposit here, and we just got to continue drilling. And I think Ross Beatty saw it as well, because it shouldn't be surprising, 20 kilometers away is a world-class asset at Dalridian. We were drilling back then some very similar holes, and then the focus was production. But Ross Beatty came back into this financing. He's liking what we're doing. I have to suspect, obviously, you don't put money in unless you see what you're doing here. And I probably see, if I'm a Ross Beatty, I see the potential of this trend again. You got Galantis, you got ourselves, and then you got Dalridian, and you've got this major trend that could be one of the most richly high-grade endowed gold trends in the world. That's why Eric Sprott's here. I'm pretty sure that's why Mike Gentile is here. It's just, we just got to continue to drill. So we're in the early days of continuing to grow this resource. And then at some point, we're going to have to go back and start mining again from underground. One of the issues, which I'm sure the readers would have heard, is the difficulty in finding a workforce has been extraordinary all over Europe. And in the UK, it's even more difficult because you've got to follow the Brexit rules, which means you can't import people from Europe any longer as you could have in the past. So you got to work through the work visa program, and miners are not deemed a critical workforce at the moment. But there's lots of discussions now, and I'm pretty sure it's going to happen in the nearer term, because the UK now, I mentioned earlier on how the Western world is recognizing now the importance of critical metals. And in the UK, all over Europe, even in the US for that matter, you're seeing Department of Defense going back to financing critical metals.
Yeah.
All over Europe, all over the world now, in the Western world, they're trying to catch up to China. And it's going to be an extraordinarily difficult way to play catch up to China. But they are now recognizing they got to support our industry. And the UK now is putting a big emphasis on critical metals, zinc, lithium, copper. And they are going to ensure now that they have the policies in place to encourage a lot more investment occurring in the UK. So obviously Northern Ireland is part of the UK, but it's in the on the island of Ireland. But I also picked up a project in Scotland. We haven't really chatted about that, and that's a couple of news releases ago, but we picked up what we think could be a high-grade, near-surface, gold-rich VMS system. And those are very rare, where you get more gold than the other metals. And, a similar deposit would be Flin Flon in Manitoba, which has very similar age rocks. And, that was over 100 million tons. If I get like a 30 million ton or 25 million ton found, this is another Arizona silver, which peaked at 1.5 billion. And this was drilled in the 70s by Consolidated Goldfields, which is now Goldfields in South Africa. But they drilled this project, and they had to go back and focused on their projects in Africa in the 70s, but hasn't been touched since the 70s and very early 80s when they did a little bit of work. But British Geological Society has been saying for a number of years, this area is very prospective for high-grade near-surface VMS targets. But no one thought to look in Scotland. Like, everyone's focused in Latin America, Africa, Canada, US. But we picked up a 200 square kilometer, what we think is a high-grade near-surface VMS target. With a number of, they drilled in the 70s, 16 meters, 11 grams gold, and I think it was 0.5% copper, 6 meters of 6% copper, 1.5 grams gold. I mean, those are great hits, but never really followed up, other than one hole in 2018 by a private company that proved what they drilled historically was there. And that's it. So our plan is, going back to your question, is where we're going to use our money. So we're going to drill underground at our Omagh project in Northern Ireland, because we're going to test now this Kerr vein, and we're going to test the Joshua vein from underground. Because again, we think there might be another vein set in between our two high-grade veins. And if we're able to prove that up, then very quickly we add a lot of ounces, just because the structure would be proven to be there, and we just got to drill it out. And these two veins are 500 meters apart, and then we think there's another vein in between these two other veins. So we're going to drill that, and then we're going to look to drill Gerlach and show the market that, look, we may have locked up a high-grade gold-rich VMS.
When do you expect that to happen? Or when can we expect results, do you think?
Yeah, so we closed our financing, so we're going to be looking to start drilling in the next 2 weeks underground, and we're working now on our plans to advance drilling at Gerlach. We might do a little bit of trenching first. We're still trying to decide how we want to do this. We might just go in and drill where they drilled historically and see what we can find to depth, because they drilled very shallow holes. So we're trying to decide what the right strategy is on Gerlach. But both of them will be advanced with this money. That's the key here. And my plan is to drill Gerlach because, I've been looking at this more and more. I like high grade, high potential projects. I love exploration. I really do. It's almost like treasure hunting. And, having found this project in Scotland, a couple of people that we all know said, when we locked this up, if this was a separately traded company, this could be a $15 to $20 million market cap without doing any work on it its own, right? And Galantis
spin off.
Well, look, I would have done this myself, right? But I'm the type of CEO that says, I work for Galantis, so I gave Galantis the first shot, and In fact, we looked at a number of assets, and
Well, I mean, spinoff from Galantis. You never know.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
saying, you never know.
yeah, yeah. Oh, look, look, there could be you just don't know, right? But
You just don't know. That's hey,
you
that's not
just
telling
don't
the
know.
future. I'm just
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
I'm just
But
joking.
look, if look, it's interesting. Like Arizona Silver or Arizona Metals, they got a VMS project down in obviously Arizona, hence the name. Again, they're over $1 billion market cap. Like this is right near surface. Great grades. So you add that to the high grade gold that we have next to what could be a 10 million ounce, 13-gram ore body, and we're drilling. Just for your readers to remember, Trav, we drilled 13 meters of 17 grams at Joshua. That was the last hole we drilled at Joshua. We drilled things like 7 meters of 31 grams at the Kearney vein, 31 meters at 4.5, sorry, 31 grams at 4.5 meters at the Kearney vein, 2.5 meters of 70 grams. So these are some high grade hits here that I still think we're scratching the surface of what we have here
Well, I'm excited.
at our Omar project. Me too.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm running against the times. I want to get this thing uploaded by the time market
All
closes.
right.
So I'm gonna have to jam. But do you want to put out anything? If someone wants to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
Oh, sure. Look, I'm send me an email at m.stefano at galantis.com. Or just call me on my mobile. It's everywhere. It's
Whoa!
416.
Are you sure you? Wait a minute. Hold on. You sure
Yeah.
you want to do that?
Look, I get texts all the time. I'm a WhatsApp person. So if someone's willing to reach out to me, my number is everywhere. So I'm not telling anything that you can't just Google and see. And my number's on our news releases. So 416-453-8433. Send me a WhatsApp. I'll read it. If it's serious, I will always answer and happy to discuss potential shareholders here. Because look, I mean, that's my job. If I'm afraid for people to call me,
you don't mess around. I get that. That's what I like about you.
Yeah. If someone needs to get a hold of me, I don't care if you want to put $500, $5,000, $5 million. Everyone's equal. You're a shareholder, right? So everyone's got to be treated equally.
Yeah, and guys, again, this isn't a solicitation to buy or sell anything. I want you guys to know what I'm invested in. And again, I invested in Galantis, and then Mario was nice. The company was nice enough to sponsor some of these videos to help me keep going and doing what I'm doing and keep investing in the space and doing other things. So I want to thank you again for that, Mario, because it means a lot. And next time you do a site visit, maybe you may want to sneak a phone call to me because I might jump on an airplane and come and see it for myself too.
That'd be great, actually.
That'd be awesome. Well, hey, we got to get together one of these days. I also need to get a hold of Ross Beatty and sit down with him and get his philosophy and, maybe his take on why he jumped back in again, and where he sees the market. So I got to get a hold of him too. That'd be a great interview. But thank you so much for all this.
That'd be a great interview. All right, look, I really appreciate it.
Well, guys, I hope you had a great day. Thank you so much again to Mario. Thank you to Galantis. I'll put his information down below in the pinned comments. I hope you guys have a great day. With that being said, the Economic Ninja is out.